minutes or so, and then we're going to break into sections. I'll be also doing a presentation on the breakout session on mindfulness with teens and also mindfulness with younger kids as well. So I just want to get started with a quote up here from someone named William James. William James is one of the first psychologists, and he was actually a local person, but he had this quote, he said, actually well over 100 years ago. He said, "The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. An education which would improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it is easier to define this ideal than it is to give practical directions for bringing it out." And what I want to be talking about today and sharing with you today is mindfulness, which is really about actually building that faculty. Can you, yep?
You going back and forth to the microphone is so hard to hear you switch out. It's much easier with the microphone.
Oh, this one's, let me see, this
Yeah, I
one's
don't think that
normal.
one's working.
I've got a lav here.
There
we go. Okay, oh, now that sounds good. All right. Booming through the auditorium. Okay, excellent. So what I'd like to do actually is start with a brief mindfulness practice that we can all do together. This is something you can share with your kids as well. This will be kind of an experiential talk that we're doing today. So I'll just invite you to sit up straight, finding a comfortable posture. Always telling our kids to sit up straight in school. And there's actually research behind this. It actually does help us when we sit up straight. And if you feel comfortable, you can allow your eyes to close. I'm just going to ring the bell. You can listen to the sound of the bell. I'm just becoming aware of the fact that you're breathing. And aware of the fact that you're sitting, your legs and back against the chair. I'll just ask you to bring to mind one of your favorite places, maybe a place you go on vacation, a place from childhood. It can be an imaginary place from a book or a movie. And with each breath, just allowing the image to become a little bit more clear. Noticing how you feel in this favorite place. Mind and in your body. And pretty soon you probably notice, even as you're in this favorite place in your mind, that you're still having thoughts. Still getting distracted. And so noticing at first any thoughts about the past that might be here. Getting out of the house this morning. The more distant past. And you can just set those aside. Just imagine you're clearing up your space, setting those thoughts aside. You might notice thoughts about the future, the rest of the day, or holidays coming up. Noticing any thoughts about the future and just setting those aside one by one. Thoughts in the present but somewhere else entirely, wondering what your kids are up to or what else is happening in this moment. And you can just set those thoughts aside as well, just clearing this space. And I'll ring the bell once more, and when I ring the bell, you can just bring your attention back out. When you do, just noticing any shift in your body, your breath, shift in your mind. And also just a bit of a shift kind of in the energy in the room now. After just doing this, maybe about 2 minutes, really short practice. So to me, this is kind of an example of practicing a short visualization that helps us get a little bit more clear, get a little bit more settled. And so the question I'd ask is, what would it be like if you felt like this a little bit more often in your busy family life, or if your kids felt like this a little bit more often? or if they could feel like this a little bit more often in school and in education and as they go off to college and as they go through life, right? And that's what I want to be talking about today. How do we kind of build this? How do we cultivate this a little bit more in our kids? So I want to, I got a lovely introduction already. I just wanted to kind of get a sense also, I'll say a few words more about myself, but in terms of who's here. I see everyone leaning this way and that way. So who here's parents of like real little kids? Okay, great. I have a 3-year-old at home and I have another one coming next spring. Elementary school age kids? Okay, high school age kids? Okay, middle school kids? Yeah, brave folks, okay. So one of the challenges, of course, of doing a talk is kind of how do we, kind of reach everybody in the audience. So I'll be kind of talking about that as we go. I'm a clinical psychologist, I'm a consultant, I'm a writer, I'm a father, I was a special educator in the past, and I've had this long-standing interest in mindfulness, and when I talk about, I do a lot of talking about mindfulness with kids and families, but I look back on my own childhood and I never heard the word mindfulness. But I actually had all these experiences that actually really kind of were mindfulness. I just never heard that word. And I grew up actually not too far from here. And I used to go in the summers to Drumlin Farm. Well, no, yeah, I see some heads nodding. Wonderful nature camp at Drumlin Farm. And they'd have us do some things there. They'd say, like, let's walk in the woods as quietly as we can without making a sound. I remember, kind of when I learned about mindfulness years later, realizing, oh, that was kind of like a mindful walking exercise. Or they'd say, let's sit in the woods and listen to all the sounds of the forest. Can you hear the trees whispering to each other? That kind of thing. And that was like a mindful listening exercise. And looking up at the clouds with my dad on like a summer's day when I was a kid, and him saying, if you just breathe and you focus on a cloud, you can actually make a change and disappear with your mind. Realizing that was like another kind of mindfulness practice. And then fast forward to many years later, I was in college. I was a pretty kind of high-strung, stressed-out student at a pretty high-achieving college, and I actually took a couple of years off because of all the stress that I was experiencing. And that's when I really kind of first heard the word mindfulness, and I found it really transformative for myself. And I decided I'm gonna, I wish I'd found this when I was a little bit younger, and I want to bring this to younger people, and that's what kind of got me started on this path, and that was almost 20 years ago now. I know I look like I'm still a college student. That was 20 years ago, you can do the math, but mindfulness keeps you young. That's the other good news about it, basically. So, what I'm going to be talking about today, although I do also encourage you to think back, to your own childhood, like were there moments you might think of as mindfulness, even if you've never heard the word, and kind of holding that in your mind today. So what is mindfulness? A model for how we can teach this to our kids, how they can learn it, why this is so helpful and important for our kids, as well as for ourselves. How do we teach them? A little bit of science, and we'll be doing a few practices along the way. And what I'll say, I'll be guiding us in a couple practices just so you can have something you take home, maybe for yourself or maybe to share with your kids. You're welcome to do this along with me, but when I go and I talk in schools, I also say, no one's going to know if you're not doing it. So if you're just making your grocery list in your head, I'm not going to know. But I encourage you, you'll get the most out of this if you participate along with me. So as I said, 20-something years ago, I was thinking, if I can teach mindfulness to kids, and they're all going to be living mindfully, there's going to be like world peace in 5 years, and we see how well that worked out, right? So I realized that what I need to do is not necessarily even start with the kids, but really kind of start with myself. That this is the best place to really begin in terms of teaching and modeling mindfulness, and then it kind of trickles down to kids. And then maybe it's building a mindful community, right? Like in our schools and in our families and in other institutions that kind of helps reinforce and reflect practicing mindfulness back to our kids. And then I think about actually teaching them mindfulness, and then maybe they're kind of doing this mindfulness thing more independently. But it really starts with us. And so whenever I give these parent talks, or I talk a lot to professionals too, I get a question over and over again. Someone raises their hand and say, well, what's the best mindfulness practice for my kid who has ADD? Or for my kid who's anxious or depressed? And the answer actually is, this is the good news and the bad news, the best mindfulness practice for your kid who's having a really difficult time is going to be your mindfulness practice. Or whatever it is, your ability to stay calm and compassionate and connected while your kid's having a meltdown, or while they're really struggling. That's the best possible gift you can offer them, is your presence. Parenting generally works best when everyone's present, right? The kid and the adult. And so it really starts with us. And I was thinking about this. The people say, well, how do we get mindful kids? Well, the best way to get more mindful kids is to surround them with mindful adults. The best way to create stressed out, mentally ill, crazy, anxious kids is to surround them with stressed out, mentally ill, anxious adults, right? Whether it's parents, whether it's teachers, whether it's anybody. So again, it really starts with us. And that's how we help our kids calm down and settle down. Because I saw this online recently, and it kind of speaks to it a bit. Has anyone tried this? Right? So never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down. Definitely not by being yelled at to calm down, right? And I've tried this as a parent, I've tried it as a teacher, I've tried it as a therapist, I've tried it, and it just does not work. The fact is that if we want our kids to be calm, we need to create a space in which they feel safe enough to calm down. We need to create schools that feel safe enough for our kids to feel calm to learn. We need to create homes in which our kids feel safe enough to calm down and reconnect with us. Right? We need to kind of model that calm so that they can reconnect with us when they're having a difficult moment. And again, I'm going to be talking about mindfulness as being that path, but whatever it is for you, finding a way to kind of create a home and a kind of emotional space where your kids feel safe enough to calm down. So I've been talking a bit about mindfulness already. I haven't even gotten to a definition yet. When I say the word mindfulness, what tends to come to mind besides this is the latest trendy thing in education? Which keeps me employed, which is great. But what comes to mind, or what definitions maybe? Meditation.
Yoga.
Being in the moment. Peace. Prayer. Interesting, yeah. That can be a path too. Anything else? Noticing. Awareness. So I'm going to share a definition that I like to use, actually incorporates a lot of this. I like to say mindfulness is paying attention, or someone said, awareness to the here and now, being present with acceptance and non-judgment, or kindness and curiosity. So this really has kind of three parts to it. And I think it's helpful to kind of, when we think about teaching kids anything, we want to break it down into smaller pieces. Right? So this first part, paying attention. Who here's ever been told to pay attention? No one's ever yelled at their kids to pay attention. Right? But who here's ever been taught actually how to pay attention? Right? Not a single hand goes up. So every day we're telling our kids, pay attention. We're telling them to do something. We're not actually teaching them how to do that. Right? Kind of back to that William James quote that I started with. So one of the most powerful things we're doing with mindfulness is we're teaching our kids and ourselves how to actually pay attention. That's going to be incredibly important in school, in their family, in their relationships, on the soccer field, in college, at their jobs, right? Everything that they do in life kind of rests on their ability to pay attention. It's one of the most important executive functions that we can offer to teach our kids. Secondly, there's this piece about the present moment, or the here and now. And admittedly, this feels a little bit abstract, but I think back actually to what it was like, or what I was like when I was a kid. And here's how my thought process would go on maybe, like a Wednesday afternoon when I find out I have a test. There's a test on Friday. I'm going to fail the test. I'm never going to get into college. I'm probably never going to get a job. I'm going to die alone under a bridge, and no one's going to come to my funeral. Like, that's where my mind would go, like right off to the future into like anxiety, nightmare land. Right? And so for some of our kids who are anxious, they're just worrying about the future. For some of us who are anxious, we're worried about the future and the future for our kids. Right? For some of our kids, maybe also they're a little bit stuck in the past. Maybe, there's been some trauma, maybe not, but maybe they're just still thinking about, what happened at the birthday party the weekend before, or something else, or even recess 5 minutes before. And so it's hard to be in the present moment. So we're trying to get into the present moment where a few things actually happen when we're in the present moment. And there's actually research on this. There's a guy that studies the present moment and how we feel in the present moment. And Matt Killingsworth, he studied thousands of people, asked them a few questions, like he buzzes them on their iPhone and says, what are you doing, how focused are you, and how happy you are. And what he found was two things. One is that what we're doing is actually far less important, half as important to our happiness as how focused we are on doing it. So the more present we are, the happier we are. The other thing he found was that our minds are wandering actually 47% of the time. I have to repeat that because half of you missed it. So our minds are wandering 47% of the time, but the good news is we can train them through mindfulness or through other practices that allow us to be in the present moment more often and then be happier and then be a little bit more effective and do whatever we need to do and train our kids in this as well. So that's that other piece about the present moment. And then lastly, there's this piece about non-judgment or acceptance. And this means a few things. It means kind of accepting our experience, which doesn't mean having to like it. I don't have to like the fact that, there's a test on Friday, but if I accept that, right, then maybe I can actually do something about it, be a little bit more effective in my life and what I need to do. And it also means not judging. It means not judging ourselves quite so harshly. I have a feeling this is a crowd of high-achieving people who've gotten pretty far in life, and also maybe gotten pretty far in life partly because you've got an internal voice saying, work harder, do better. And sometimes that voice actually reaches this point where it says, you're not good enough. You're not a good enough parent. I'm sure no one's ever said that to themselves in here. Right? Or that person's better at their job than you, right? We've all had that experience. Our kids, whether we're not trying to kind of have them internalize a voice like that, but they kind of automatically do. They're comparing themselves to other kids and other athletes and kind of constantly, especially as they get older. So it's learning how to have a little bit more kind of self-compassion, self-acceptance, not believe everything about that critical voice is telling us in any moment. And then we start to put all these pieces together and we get something that looks like mindfulness. But we can teach ourselves and teach our kids, as I said, these elements of mindfulness, paying attention to the here and now with acceptance and non-judgment. Right? We can teach practices that are about paying attention, teach practices that are about the here and now, teach practices that are about acceptance and non-judgment. Because we want to when we teach kids anything, we want to break it into little pieces. Right? Like, did anyone here learn calculus in kindergarten? Right? Who learned calculus ever? All right, nice. Impressive. Right? I barely got through high school calculus. But the point is, right, we start with the ABCs, we start with the 1, 2, 3s, right, in kindergarten, then we build up to something a little bit bigger that we might call mindfulness after these elements. So words are a way of describing what mindfulness is, sometimes especially with kids who are maybe a little bit more visual in their learning styles, maybe images or pictures can show us something about what mindfulness is. Does anyone notice anything different about these two?
I want that one.
You want that one, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's what I see, right? The human being, like there's traffic, the bills are piling up, public speaking podium, I should probably be panicking. Right? There's not even the sunshine in the trees anywhere in the human being's view. The dog has just the sunshine in the trees. None of that other stuff. And so the reality is we're human beings. We're not dogs, right? Unfortunately, perhaps. Right? We do have to think about the past. We do have to think about the future. But what happens over time is when we're like this today, worrying about all this stuff, I'm going to feel like this again tomorrow. And I'm going to get stuck like this. It's actually going to rewire my brain to be just in stress mode all the time. And it will be for our kids too. So what mindfulness to me is about kind of building a shortcut so we can get to the present moment that much more quickly when it's time to be in the present moment. Or we can be here when it's useful to be here. Because we've all probably had that experience, maybe even yesterday, right? It's Friday afternoon. It's the weekend. I'm out walking the dog or just taking a walk in the park, and where's our mind? It's thinking about what's happening Monday morning. It's back at work from a couple hours before. Right? And it's not able to really be there. Or it's vacation time. Who here feels like it takes 3 days to really settle into vacation and then suddenly it's over? Right? So what if we could build a shortcut to get here a little bit faster and teach that to our kids as well? To me, that's what mindfulness is about. And it's also, mindfulness is not just about, sunshine and unicorns and rainbows and everything is wonderful. It's actually just about seeing things as they are, seeing the beauty in the world as well as the ugliness and the dangers. And so I work with teenagers, and a teenager pointed this out to me in the best way possible. They said, if the human being, if they're thinking about all that, what are they about to step in, right? And so, right, it's really seeing everything just as it is, not just like everything in the world is beautiful and perfect. And this starts, to me, where mindfulness also fits in, is almost like a public health intervention when we can teach our kids ways to manage their stress, because there's this big survey of stress in American life just a couple of years ago. And what I've found, any guesses as to who the most stressed out people in America are?
Teens.
Teens, absolutely. So as our kids get older, whether they're teens yet or whether they're teens, in a few more years, they're going to be going into that really high stress age. And the more, they're getting busier and busier, at the same time, we're not giving them the skills that they need to be able to manage their stress. Right? They're getting more and more overscheduled. So one of my kids actually sent me this from online also. It says, you can have studying and sleep, but then you have no friends.
Right.
You have sleep and a social life, but you're failing all your classes.
Right.
You have studying and a social life, you're getting no sleep, and doing all three is impossible. This is how a lot of our kids feel. Where's family on this?
Right.
Where's sports? Or where's my parents are getting divorced? Or where's I take a bus for an hour and a half every day to the suburbs? Or where's, all the other things that our kids might be worrying about every single day, right? So there's so much more on their plates than there used to be. And what's great is that we're now starting to teach more social and emotional skills in school and helping kids actually learn how to manage this stress. And again, to me, one of the best ways to do this is with mindfulness. But it's gotten, I'm sure anyone who's got teenagers or not even yet teenagers, sees how overscheduled our kids are. I have a private practice out in the western suburbs, and there was a 16-year-old kid in my practice a couple years ago from one of the suburbs that begins with the letter N. I will not mention which one it is. But the mom came in and she said, I've got his schedule every afternoon into 15-minute increments. Where should I fit in mindfulness? And I was like, forget mindfulness. Just like let him roam free in the afternoons. He's a teenager. Or these other things that we have our kids doing, right? Sports has become like just totally insane, sort of all 4 seasons. You got to pick your sport by 4th or 5th grade, right? Even the arts. I was working with another kid actually who was saying, I can't make it to our session next week because our team made it to states. And I was like, I didn't know you did a sport. And he was saying, no, the drama team made it to the state drama championship. I was thinking it's great that the arts have been elevated, but this thing that used to be fun is now just like another competition, another thing about getting into college. Right? So how can we actually restore some fun to our kids' lives so they're not so stressed out? Or teach them some other skills for managing their stress. So I want to do a little demonstration about what's happening when we're stressed out or our kids are stressed out. You can do this along with me. I want you to hold up your hands like this and just make really tight fists, like as tightly as you can. And as you do this, just notice what happens in your body. Notice what happens in your mind. What happens to your breath. Other times you feel like this. Or see your kids like this. And then just let go, noticing what it's like to let go. And then just kind of collapse over like this. And again, how's your body feel, your breath? Does your mind feel open or closed, alert or asleep? Times you feel like this, or see this in your kids. Then sitting up straight, not too tight, not too loose, just hands, palms up, hands upright. What's happening with your breath, your body? Mind open or closed, alert, asleep. And just take each hand, rest them on the other, and just rest these both over your heart. And again, just these same few questions. And you can just set your hands back down to your parent you posture. So I was just guiding us through a a little bit about what happens when we're stressed out. All human beings, right, from little kids to adults and beyond. And when we're stressed out, we have a few responses, basically. And these are wired into us through evolution. So thousands of years ago, our ancestors are being chased by saber-toothed tigers or lions or whatever it might be. And what do we want to do in that situation? We want to fight, we want to flee, or maybe just kind of freeze, or maybe even just give up and say, forget it, wait for the attack to be over. This is really useful when we're being chased by tigers. There's not that many tigers even here in Melrose, although I was giving this talk in Texas recently and someone said, well, actually I'm a lion tamer. And I was like, okay, great. You're going to know how to respond to that now. Everyone else in the crowd, okay. So, right, we're responding to these physical threats, but now we're faced with like financial threats as adults, or as our kids, academic threats, or social threats, or athletic threats, or how will I get a date to the prom, or will I get invited to the birthday party? And we respond in the same way. This is basically fight or flight. I want to fight off that tiger. I want to flee from it. This is more what we call freeze or forget it. And freeze and forget it being more fade into the woodwork, become camouflage, or forget it, just give up and wait for this attack to be over. And so fight is more like when our kids are getting like aggressive and irritable maybe and kind of fighting with us or even fighting with other kids. Flight over time actually starts to rewire the brain into like an anxiety disorder. How do I avoid this situation as much as possible? And then they get to high school, and they get sent to my office, right? Freeze being, again, that kind of camouflage, fade into the woodwork, and forget it being kind of over time that turns into depression, giving up. Kids not acting out, but maybe they're like not quite handing in their homework. They're sort of slipping between the cracks, sitting in the back of classroom, right? That kind of thing that we worry about in a different way. Again, working with teenagers, there's actually a fifth F response that you can put in here, but I'll let you use your imagination to do that. What's happening in the brain? Well, actually, when we're in fight or flight, or freeze or forget it, that's actually turning on a part of our brain called the amygdala. That's one of the oldest parts of the brain, most primitive parts of the brain, and that's where the fight or flight response lives. When that part of the brain is active way deep down, it actually shuts off the rest of the brain, where we think things through and see the big picture and solve complicated problems and things like this. Solve emotional problems, solve difficult math problems, see the future, see more than 2 minutes into the future, basically. So our best brain is not actually working when we're stressed out. Right? We probably know this. Like, how are the MCAS going to go if your kids are like this? Or how's a new bedtime negotiation going to go if you're like this or the kids are like this? Probably not all that well. So what happens when our kids are stressed? Everyone and everything looks like a threat. That nice teacher who says, oh, come see me after school for some extra help. Right now, they're just out to get me, that teacher. They're not helpful. Right? My parents are trying to ruin my life. Right? Everyone looks like a threat in some ways. And what's happening in the body, we notice, like, stop breathing, right? Start tensing one part of our body, the rest of our body starts to tense up. Heart rate goes up, things like this. Digestive system shuts down, immune system shuts down. Who needs energy for these long-term survival things where our bodies think it's just short-term survival time? This is why when we're stressed out, we get sick, right? Or we get stomach cramps or that kind of thing, because those parts of the body are shutting down. There's another thing that's also happening, and our stress hormones, there's a stress hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is what starts flowing through us when we're stressed out. Cortisol actually interferes with learning and memory. Cortisol inhibits brain development in our kids. It actually even inhibits like physical development if there's enough of it. Cortisol does something else. It works on the same receptors as another neurohormone called oxytocin. And if you don't know what oxytocin does, oxytocin is the love hormone. It's what we feel when we're getting along with our kids. It's what's released when our kids are first born, or when we're falling in love, or we're feeling kind of safe and warm and cuddly. Right? And so we can't actually be both really stressed out and really kind of loving and caring at the same time. It's almost neurologically impossible to be both. Right? And so that's, part of why we see, like there's, or when our kids are stressed out or we're stressed out, right? It's again, sort of everyone looks like a threat, or we don't feel close to each other, things like this. We see epidemics of relational bullying in high-stress schools and that kind of thing. So the good news is we've evolved. We're no longer cave people quite so much anymore. We've got other ways we can respond to stress. We also did these other postures. I call this the attend response and the befriend response, or we might call this mindfulness and compassion or self-compassion. And basically these shut off that whole other system. Right? So the reverse starts happening. The amygdala, that inner caveman that says fight or flee, that shuts down. Blood starts flowing to the rest of the brain, the outer cortices of the brain, where we're able to think things through. See the big picture. Not just see everyone and everything as a threat. That teacher who says, come see me after school, oh, maybe they're actually pretty helpful and they could help me with my math homework. Maybe my parents are not trying to ruin my life. They're just trying to ruin it a little bit. Maybe is what they're trying to do. Right? Be able to start to see the big picture. How are your kids going to do on the MCAS if they're like this? How's that argument going to go if you could both be a little bit more like this or like this in that moment? So that's what we're trying to, as I think about teaching kids mindfulness, teaching ourselves mindfulness, that we're trying to get to. A little bit more of this. The breath becomes regular, heartbeat starts slowing down, immune system, digestive system starts working. Oxytocin can flow, allowing us to feel safe enough to calm down. Right? Attached to our kids, and they can feel attached and trusting back to us or toward their teachers or to the other important people in their lives. Right? And cortisol shuts off, which allows the brain to actually work at its best and the body to develop at its best. So we can actually, have these other responses to stress, the attend and befriend responses, through teaching a few simple practices that I'll be giving us a demonstration of a couple and then doing some more in the breakout sessions. How are we doing on time? Okay. I just also want to emphasize it's not like fight or flight is bad and attend and befriend is good all the time, right? These are just useful for different situations, right? So just kind of thinking, like, what's going to be best on the soccer field? What's going to be best if someone cuts you off in traffic? What's going to be best if there is a real danger, right? That kind of thing, as well as what's going to be best in the classroom, what's going to be best around the dinner table, things like this. So you probably noticed when you made these tight fists, or even when you were collapsed over like that it was hard to breathe. And our breath actually is one of the best kind of barometers of what's happening in terms of our stress, in terms of our emotional state. And as I said, I have a 3-year-old at home. I can even listen when he's like in the other room just to his breath and tell what kind of mood he's in. If I'm listening and his breath is kind of long and even, I know that he's really happy with his Legos. If I start to hear like, right, I know that he's starting to get upset. So we can just kind of tune in to our kids and also to ourselves to check in with our breathing. Now there's also research on the breath, and there's a woman named Kelly McGonigal. She was at BU, now she's at Stanford, and she actually found that the optimal number of breaths, it's kind of a goofy thing to study, the optimal number of breaths for a long-term focus is 4 to 6 breaths in a minute, which is not very many. And so I heard someone else say you can use the breath like a remote control to change how stressed out you are, to get your brain to open up and focus, to get your body to settle back down. And this, I think, is such a great analogy to kind of use with kids. Your breath is like a remote control. So I'm going to share a couple breathing practices, as well as a couple other kinds of mindfulness practices, because I did have a kid once tell me that deep breathing was played out. I was like, okay, gotta think of some other things besides breathing here. But the first one, and this is great for really little kids, and I do this with my own 3-year-old. This is the hot chocolate breath. And we just imagine that we're holding a cup of hot chocolate like this. You can do this along with me. And if it's really hot and filled all the way up, we want to smell it, because it smells so good. And then to cool it off, just gently blowing out through our mouth. And inhaling through your nose, smelling. Blowing out through your mouth, cooling off. And through your nose. Out through your mouth. And then you can just take your hot chocolate and set it back down. And again, after that, just checking in with your body, checking in a bit with your mind, and again, checking in kind of with the whole room, right? Just a little bit more settled. That was only 3 breaths, right? Pretty good. This doesn't have to take tons and tons of time, right? The more you do, the more you'll get, just like physical exercise. But we can actually change our body chemistry, change our physiology through breathing, through some other really short practices. So this is a fun one with little kids. Sometimes called the cooling off breath. If you're feeling hot emotions like anger or frustration, cool off with the cooling off breath, the hot chocolate breath. If your kid doesn't like chocolate, I've done different, you can do soup breathing. I was in Poland doing this workshop and we did borscht breathing. So you can do pizza breathing, right? It doesn't matter what it is. But it really helps just sort of settle, maybe just a couple before bedtime, or first thing in the morning, or before homework time, or before dinner, just doing a couple hot chocolate breaths, something like that. Another one, the 7-Eleven breath. And the other place we see mindfulness is not just being used by flaky therapists like myself, but people like professional athletes and first responders and all kinds of people in really high-stress jobs are using mindfulness to regulate their anxiety, regulate their stress. So for example, the 7-Eleven breath, I read somewhere that this is used by first responders, like firefighters and ambulance drivers. Again, I've got a 3-year-old boy at home talking about firefighters, like, okay. So I think about this, right? It's like the firefighter or someone in that dangerous situation, they have to rush into a burning building. Everything in their body is saying, fight, flee, get out of here, right? They have to keep their brain and mind really clear. The person I need to rescue is over there. That wall's about to collapse, and there's the exit I need to get out from. Think clearly and get yourself out. So this 7-Eleven breath, we can do this together. It's about as simple as it sounds. We breathe in, counting to 7. We breathe back out, counting to 11. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And breathing in, counting to yourself, up to 7. Back out to 11. And up to 7. And back out to 11. And then just letting your breath find its own pace, a little bit slower. And just bringing your attention back out. With little kids, in particular, breathing all the way into 7 and all the way out to 11 is going to be hard because there's the counting and their lungs are much smaller than ours. It's not so easy for us adults. Even it took me some practice to get the rhythm of this down. A friend of mine with younger kids just has them pick a short word and a long word. Because breathing in for shorter and out for longer is what settles our nervous system. So she has them breathe in bird, breathe out brontosaurus. Breathe in horse, breathe out hippopotamus. Breathe in Maine, breathe out Massachusetts. Something like that. Which again gets to the same idea. The kids can even pick their own favorite word. So the 7-Eleven breath, again for maybe the more skeptical middle school age kids, right, who find the hot chocolate breath not their thing, right? It's got a little bit more buying around it around athletes or first responders or other people like that. It's also one thing that happens as a clinical psychologist, which is my job. Parents send kids to me and they say, oh, my kid's got anxiety, my kid's got panic attacks or something like that, and I'll meet with them. And if I start off that meeting and say, so your mom tells me you have panic attacks, they're like, no, I don't, I'm fine, right? So one of my approaches also is, kids, especially as they become teenagers, aren't that interested always in what we adults think, or they certainly act that way. So it's not actually true that they don't care what we think. But they do care a lot about their peers. They care a lot about their friends, being a good friend to their friends. So I'll sometimes talk about this as, this is like psychological first aid. Maybe you don't have panic attacks, but by the time you're done with college, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of your friends will have a panic attack. And you can actually help them. You can stop that panic attack by teaching them the 7-Eleven breath, or by teaching them the hot chocolate breath, or some of these other things, but we better practice it ourselves to make sure you've got it down for when you do teach your friend. But this actually, kids really feel empowered when they kind of hear that they can be helpful in some ways. So that's the 7-Eleven breath. One more way of breathing, the stealth sigh. A sigh is a way that we let out a lot of extra energy and frustration and exasperation, like we probably all at the end of a busy day can just Now, I remember being, kind of a teenager, and if you live with teenagers, and I work with teenagers also, you probably had the experience where they sigh at you, right? So one thing I sometimes will teach that age group is, okay, you're super annoyed at your parents or your teacher, or whoever it might be, you can do like a stealth sigh. It's like really passive aggressive. They don't have to know that you're sighing at them, but you can still get out that frustration. Just take a long breath in, and then really slowly, just silent, stealth sigh, all the way back out to the bottom of your breath. So that's just another short practice there. I'm already a little bit over time. So I just want to say a little bit more about where mindfulness can be really helpful. I'll actually shift my slides up a little bit, so if we do breakout groups, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the brain science here, about which parts of the brain are changing. But suffice it to say that there's all kinds of fantastic research these days on concentration and creativity, attention, depression, anxiety, sleep, stress, thousands and thousands of studies about where mindfulness is helpful with these. And then I think kind of more largely, as I'm talking kind of to all the parents, there's some educators here too, kind of thinking how do we kind of create more of this in the system? And thinking about, maybe doing a community ride reading or trainings, having groups for parents and for teachers where they can start to learn a little bit about mindfulness. Integrating this into your family life, integrating it into the staff life at the school, doing things like having a day of mindfulness, maybe, or as a friend of mine called it, do one thing at a time day. Is actually how they describe their day of mindfulness. Having resources in the school, talking to your local politicians, talking to the local media, talking to the school board if this is something that excites you to bring more mindfulness into the schools. So we'll just end with another short practice. Again, I promised it wouldn't be all breathing. So what I'd like you to do again, just find a comfortable posture, just sitting up straight. And I'll ring the bell. When I ring the bell, see if you can listen and hear the beginning, middle, and end sound of the bell as it fades. And just continuing to listen to other sounds. Noticing sounds from above or from below, from the left or from the right, and in front of you. Sounds from behind you. Sounds far away. What's the farthest away sound you can hear right now? Sounds closer. Sound of your own breath. Sound of your own heartbeat, if that's possible. Your own thoughts. I'll just ring the bell once more. And again, listening to the beginning, middle, and end sound of the bell. Bringing your awareness to the rest of your senses. back out into the room.
So the comedian, of course, said 80% of life is just showing up. And to me, that's what mindfulness is about. It's about showing up for life. We know our kids are going to face all kinds of incredible stressors, right, that we can't always protect them from. There comes a point where we have to teach them how to protect themselves and how to be more resilient and learn how, rather than fight or flee or try to or freeze or try to escape from every stressful thing that comes along, right, learn how to attend and even befriend those difficult experiences that they'll inevitably face. And so to me, that's what mindfulness is all about. So thank you very much.